On May 14, 1948, Palestinian Jews established the State of Israel. The next day, the new nation was invaded by the combined armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, assisted by volunteer fighters from other Arab countries. The Arab stated reasons for the invasion were 1. To stop the violence and to restore law and order in Palestine, and 2. To allow the Palestinian people to form a government of their choice. Also cited by the Arabs was the displacement of Palestinian Arabs caused by Jewish aggression. As the nation of Israel was by now in existence, the resulting war was one fought by sovereign states. From the east, Jordanian and Iraqi forces crossed the Jordan River into Palestine. The Jordanians advanced along 2 columns for Jerusalem, which they surrounded on May 17, 1948. After heavy house-to-house fighting, the Jewish defenders of the city surrendered when they ran low on food and ammunition. The Jordanians captured Jerusalem and occupied Latrun, a strategic outpost overlooking the highway that led to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the Iraqis advanced to the vicinity surrounding the Arab-populated city of Jenin, Nablus, and Tal-Karan. On May 25th, they captured Galim, Kafar Vona, and Eid Vered before being stopped at Netanya, which was their ultimate objective on the western coast. Netanya's fall would have divided Israel's coastal areas into 2. A strong Israeli counterattack on Jenin forced the Iraqis to pull back and defend the city. The Iraqis repulsed the Israeli attack, but now they were concerned with making further advances because of the risk of being cut off from the rear. The Iraqis then switched to a defensive position, which they maintained for the rest of the war. From the northeast, Syrian forces began their campaign by advancing toward the south side of the Sea of Galilee. They captured some Israeli villages before being defeated at Degania. The Syrians soon withdrew across the border to regroup. On June 6, they launched another attack, this time in northern Galilee, where they captured Mishmar Hayarden. Israeli reinforcements soon arrived in northern Palestine, stopping further Syrian advances. From the south, the Egyptian army, which was the largest among the invading forces, entered Palestine through the Sinai Desert. The Egyptians then advanced through southern Palestine on 2 fronts, one along the coastal road for Tel Aviv and another through central Negev for Jerusalem. On June 11, 1948, the United Nations or UN imposed a truce which lasted for 28 days until July 8th. A UN panel arrived in Palestine to try and work out a deal among the warring sides. However, the UN effort failed to bring about a settlement. By the end of the first weeks of the war, the Israeli army had stopped the supposed Arab juggernaut that the Israelis feared would simply roll in and annihilate their fledgling nation. Although the fighting had essentially ended in a stalemate, Israeli morale was bolstered considerably as many Israeli villages had been saved by sheer determination alone. Local militias had thrown back Arab regular army units. Earlier on May 26, Israeli authorities had merged the various small militias and a large Jewish paramilitary into a single Israeli Defense Forces, the country's regular armed forces. Mandatory conscription into the military service was imposed, enabling Israel to double the size of its personnel from 30,000 to 60,000 soldiers. Despite the UN arms embargo, the Israeli government was able to purchase large quantities of weapons and military equipment, including heavy firearms, artillery pieces, battle tanks, and warplanes. The Arabs were seriously handicapped by the UN arms restriction, as Western nations that supplied much of the Arabs' weapons adhered to the embargo. Consequently, Arab soldiers experienced ammunition shortages during the fighting, forcing the Arabs to switch from offensive to defensive positions. Furthermore, Arab reinforcements simply could not match in numbers, zeal, and determination the new Israeli conscripts arriving at the front lines. And just as important, the war revealed the efficiency, preparedness, and motivation of the Israeli army in stark contrast to the inefficiency, disunity, and inexperience of Arab forces. During the truce, the UN offered a new partition plan, which was rejected by the opposing sides. Fighting restarted on July 8th, one day before the end of the truce. On July 9th, Israeli units in the center launched an offensive aimed at opening a corridor from Tel Aviv to eastern Palestine in order to lift the siege on Jerusalem. The Israelis captured Lida and Ramli, 2 Arab strongholds near Tel Aviv, forcing thousands of Arab civilians to flee from their homes to escape the fighting. The Israelis reached Latrun, just outside Jerusalem, but failed to break the solid Jordanian defenses despite making repeated assaults using battle tanks and heavy armored vehicles. The Israelis also failed to break into the old city of Jerusalem and eventually were forced to withdraw. But on July 16th, a powerful Israeli offensive in northern Palestine captured Nazareth and the whole region of Lower Galilee, extending from Haifa in the coastal west to the Sea of Galilee in the east. Further north, the Syrian army continued to hold Mishmar Hayarden after stopping an Israeli attempt to take the town. In southern Palestine, the Egyptian offensives in Negba on July 12, Gal on July 14, and Birot Yitzhak were thrown back by the Israeli army with high Egyptian casualties. On July 18th, the UN imposed a second truce, this time of no specific duration. The truce lasted nearly 3 months when on October 15th, fighting broke out once more. During the truce, relative calm prevailed in Palestine despite high tensions and the occasional outbreak of small-scale fighting. The UN also proposed new changes to the partition plan, which however were rejected once more by the warring sides. On September 22nd, the Israeli government passed a law that made all captured territories an integral part of Israel, including those that would be won in the future. By the fall of 1948, the Israeli army totaled 90,000 soldiers, greatly outnumbering the combined Arab forces. Large shipments of war materials continued to arrive in Israel. In mid-October 1948, Israeli forces attacked and captured Egyptian-held Beersheba and Beit Jibrin. Consequently, the whole Negev came under Israeli control, with 4,000 Egyptian troops trapped in Al-Fallujah and Iraq al-Manshiyah, 2 villages near Ashkelon. Israeli warships blocked the Egyptian Navy from rescuing the trapped soldiers. Later in October 1948, the UN imposed a third truce. However, fighting continued in Marmon in northern Palestine. On October 24th, another powerful Israeli offensive captured the whole northern Galilee, forcing Syrian and Lebanese units, including their Arab paramilitary auxiliaries, to withdraw across their respective borders. Tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians fled or were forced to leave to escape the fighting, although many other Arab residents, about 20%, remained. Those who remained were eventually granted Israeli citizenship. In early November 1948, Israeli forces pursuing Lebanese troops into the border penetrated 5 miles into Lebanon and captured many Lebanese villages. Israel later withdrew its forces from Lebanon after both countries signed an armistice at the end of the war. On December 22nd, Israeli forces attacked Egyptian units positioned in the southern Negev, driving them across the Egyptian border after 5 days of fighting. The Israelis then crossed into the Sinai Peninsula and advanced toward Al-Arish to trap the Egyptian army. Britain and the United States exerted strong pressure on Israel, forcing the latter to withdraw its forces from the Sinai. On January 3, 1949, the Israeli army surrounded the Egyptian forces inside the Gaza Strip in southwestern Palestine. 3 days later, Egypt agreed to a ceasefire, which soon came into effect. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War was over. In the following months, Israel signed separate armistices with Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. At war's end, Israel held 78% of Palestine, 22% more than was allotted to the Jews in the original UN partition plan. Israel's territories comprised the whole Galilee and Jezreel Valley in the north, the whole Negev in the south, the coastal plains, and West Jerusalem. Jordan acquired the West Bank, while Egypt gained the Gaza Strip. No Palestinian state was formed. During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the 1947-1948 Civil War in Palestine that preceded it, over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled from their homes, with most of them eventually settling in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and southern Lebanon. About 10,000 Palestinian Jews were displaced by the conflict. Furthermore, as a consequence of these wars, tens of thousands of Jews left or were forced to leave from many Arab countries. Most of these Jewish refugees settled in Israel.